So let's talk about overdiagnosis. So it's an overused term, but basically what we're really talking about are, these are women who are diagnosed with breast cancer, but if we hadn't diagnosed them as part of a screening program, they either would never have been diagnosed at all, or they might have been diagnosed several years down the track and the disease would never have harmed them. So remember, one of the sine qua nons of screening is, first do no harm. These are asymptomatic women, and we've turned them into cancer cases through the breast screening program. So overdiagnosis is a harm that needs to be dealt with appropriately. And the problem is that once a woman's diagnosed with breast cancer, on current evidence, you cannot make a treatment decision to say, we'll watch and wait. Jane's nodding. We just don't have that information available to us. We'd love the molecular biologists to be able to do that for us, but at the moment, they're way off. So how does it happen? This is taken from an editorial in the New England Journal of Medicine. So I don't have to tell this audience that not every cancer grows at the same rate. So you've got some fast-growing ones, starting from an abnormal cell, right? And this is a bit simplistic. It's basically trying to say that the size of the cancer is the only thing that's related to whether the woman dies or not. So these are slow-growing ones, so it becomes symptomatic. This is the size that it has to be to cause symptoms. And if it grows slower, it takes a long time. See, that's time there on that axis. And if it grows really slowly, it might never get to that point. Well, the problem is we actually screen for and find cancers before they become symptomatic. So we might be able to detect them here, in which case we're going to be picking up a lot more of the very slow-growing ones. And it might even be down there, for example, that we can detect, in which case we pick up a lot of the non-progressive ones. So that gives rise to overdiagnosis. So how do you estimate the size? Well, I wish we had more recent and better randomised controlled trials, because that's the ideal way. I think the way they've done it in the prostate trial, the European trial, is fabulous. I wish we had the same kind of data for breast screening. You can do it you can estimate what the incidence would have been in a population in the absence of screening, but then you've got to make some heroic assumptions about what's happening to the incidence rates and mortality rates and so forth. And an absolute key factor is that you have to allow for lead time. Now, so what's lead time? So when we screen, the whole idea is to pick cancers up early. And the amount of time by which we advance the diagnosis of the disease is called the lead time. So I'll take you through that a little bit. So this is really just to explain the situation. So this is one of the Swedish trials. So I think to be a woman in a trial, you had to live in Sweden, basically. They were just about all done there. So these are women, this is the diagnosis of breast cancers. These are the number of women diagnosed with breast cancer of those who were invited to screening. And this is the control group, right? So they started back here and they finished their screening here. You see what's happened? Is that the number of cancers, this has just smoothed it out a bit. You can see the difference is greatest here and less down up here. So what you would expect, if you screen for cancers, you're going to find them. That's the whole purpose of the program. If there's no such thing as overdiagnosis, eventually these two lines here will converge. If you wait long enough, they will come together. So if they don't come together, apart from chance variation, there must have been some overdiagnosis. And you can see from the Malmo trial there was. So the question is, how much was there? Well, at the end of screening, there was an excess number of cases of 120. There were 120 more cases in the invitation arm, giving a 30%. And by the end of follow-up, which was in 2001, 16 years later, it was down to 80. So what had happened is the control group had caught up. So you've picked the fruit from the, gosh, that's a poor analogy, isn't it, for breast cancer? But you know what I mean. And basically the fruit has regrown in the other group. So that's what's happened. That happened in the Malmo trial. So here's a slide from a systematic review done by a group in Sydney who have done a lot of really good work about overdiagnosis and the harms and benefits of screening. And some people would argue that they've never been great fans of screening. But this is their estimates from trials, from some trials. They didn't include them all because the other trials that haven't been included, none of them took account of the lead time properly. So here's the Malmo trial that I've just shown you. So here's a paper that was published in the BMJ, looking at invasive cancers only or including in situ cancers using one method. And this is the gotcha. This is one by gotcha. Look at the difference using the same trial, same data, 10% versus 32%. And my colleagues in Sydney say that they haven't allowed enough time to take account of the lead time. And here's another analysis by Sue Moss, who should know better, but didn't also take account of lead time properly. You can see the ones that haven't accounted for the lead time have way overestimated the overdiagnosis problem because of what I showed you in that Malmo slide. All right, so you can see that it's a profound effect, and you've really got to be careful. I've got a couple of slides here from a paper by Stephen Duffy, published in the Journal of Medical Screening a couple of years ago. So his estimate from the Swedish 2-county trial, which is another one of the Swedish studies, was that for every 1,000 women screened for 20 years, there were 4.3 extra cases, which is about 12%. Or a better way of looking at it is, how many extra women do we treat for each death that we prevent? So there were he estimated 2 deaths prevented for each woman treated without benefit from the Swedish 2-county trial. And then from the English screening program, he came to a similar conclusion, said that there are 2.5 deaths prevented for each woman treated without benefit, with a fairly low percentage of overdiagnosis. So that's on one extreme. And then we go to the other extreme, which is again by the Cochrane Collaborative Group. And my reading of this paper is they didn't give adequate allowance for lead time, and they've estimated the overdiagnosis to be 33%. So the only point I would differ from Jane before was that she said it varied between 2% and 30%, but actually I'm about to show you one that shows it's 50%. So it's extraordinary, these differences. So this paper was published 2 years ago by Stephen Morrell and people from Sydney. Well, actually, he's from Queensland, but it's basically data from New South Wales. And they used one of those time trends, and they compared different age groups and before and after. And you can see that they've got very high estimates. They did adjust for lead time and changes in risk factors. So that's one paper where they did that, and I think they did that reasonably well, and again, very high. And then coming back to the Cochrane group here, they've done a meta-analysis on incidence trends in regions with screening programs, and they've got an estimate there of 52%, so that's very high. But most of the things that they've included, again, didn't have adequate adjustment for lead time. I think it's fair to say that we need much better evidence around overdiagnosis. It is a problem. We really don't have a good handle on what it is. Except to say that if you don't allow for lead time in your analysis, you're going to way overestimate it. So this is my conclusion around overdiagnosis. You can see, well, I think everyone would agree that those estimates are pretty widely different. Oh, this is a hangover from a previous talk, sorry. I gave a talk on overdiagnosis to a bunch of surgeons in New Zealand not that long ago, and I was almost run out of town because they said it was all just due to DCIS, but it's not. When I talk about overdiagnosis, we're talking about invasive cancers, and you can't tell those ones that are overdiagnosed apart from those that are not. So that's the problem. And I think this is a fundamental issue here that you mentioned in your introduction, that screening programs really do need to inform women, and I think better, about the benefits and the harms than we have been doing. I actually think that what's on our own website, sorry, I'm wearing my Cancer Council hat now, is really good. Now I want to finish off with just this one thing, and this is, I just wish we had more of these kinds of studies. This is a paper from the Florentine screening program, I think I might have to go there and do a site visit. So you can see what they did. They took women who were invited to the first screening round, and they looked at deaths and cancers up and for another many, many years, and they compared those who attended and those who didn't, and they estimated that to save one life, 2 cancers were detected as opposed to 2 deaths for 1 extra in the analysis by Duffy. I really like this paper. Now the problem is it's not a randomised controlled trial, so the women who attended might well be different from those that didn't attend. So if, for example, women who attended were at low risk, then we're going to overestimate the mortality reduction and underestimate the overdiagnosis problem. It's really hard to get around that. Even if you had good data on risk factors, is still, you know, a residual issue in my mind at least about how much of that was a problem. But you can see, but you know, if we'd had the ability, if when we set up BreastScreen here we'd thought about this, we might have been able to do studies like this, because the cohort studies are the best way to go because they enable you to look at harms and benefits in the one go. And the only other way you can do that is through trials. Everything else, I'm afraid, makes it pretty difficult.